Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about the second grade standard 2.OA.2. Here is how you would read that standard. The first number indicates the grade level. So the grade level is second grade. The letters indicate the specific math domain. This particular domain is operations and algebraic thinking. The following number indicates the standard underneath that domain. So this is standard number 2 under the second grade math domain, operations and algebraic thinking. This particular standard focuses in on learners being able to use mental strategies to add and subtract within 20 while demonstrating fluency. But before we learn more about the standard, let's take a quick look at our vision for the Izora Elaine Dean Educational Center.
Welcome to the Izora Elaine Dean Educational Center. IED, 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 you ready? IED, 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 I'm ready. Let's go get him, let's go get him. IED, we ready. IED, IED, 'cause IED is for me.
The vision of IED is to help learners and their families to increase their knowledge of educational standards, such as Standard 2.OA.2, as well as educational policies and educational procedures, so that they can maximize their educational experiences and effectively advocate for their own education. Our mission is to spark a mind and to change a life. So let's dive into that standard a little bit more. So this particular standard requires learners to be able to learn about and use a variety of strategies to solve addition and subtraction problems. So here are a couple of mental strategies that are actually listed within the standard itself. One would be counting on. A second strategy would be using the relationship between addition and subtraction. A third strategy would be making 10. And a fourth strategy would be creating an easier problem. So let me give you a couple of examples of each one of these mental strategies that learners should be able to use while performing this standard. So the first strategy that was mentioned was counting on. So let's say, for instance, if we gave the learner the equation 9 plus 6. Instead of starting at 0, counting on up to 9 and then adding on another 6, the learner would actually start at the number 9. So while she's thinking about this, it may sound something like this. I started at 9 and counted 6 more. I landed on 15. So we are encouraging learners to simply count on from one number to get to the next instead of starting at 0. Here's another strategy that was mentioned. The second strategy is making a 10. So it may look like this. If the learner knows that a 9 and a 1 equals 10, they may borrow a 1 from the 6 and make it a 5. Therefore, instead of the equation being 9 plus 6, it becomes 10 plus 5, and that equals 15. A very effective way mentally to solve this particular equation. Here is one of the other mental strategies that was mentioned. So if a learner is looking at the equation 15 minus 9, they may be thinking about the relationship between addition and subtraction, realizing that addition and subtraction are opposites of one another. So if the learner knows that 9 plus 6 equals 15, she may also know that 15 minus 9 equals 6. And finally, here is another effective strategy, is to create an easier problem. So for instance, again, if the equation is 15 minus 9, the learner may reason, I added a 1 to the 9 and made it a 10. Then I had the equation 15 minus 10, which I knew was 5. So I added a 1 to the 5, and that equals 6. So 15 minus 9 equals 6. So these are just a few of the mental strategies that this particular standard is really encouraging learners to be able to use. And here is why this is important, because these strategies, when they are used repeatedly and learners are proficient with using them, it leads to fluency. And so many times when we think about fluency, we think about it from a reading perspective. But let's take a look at what fluency actually means in math, because this is the end goal for all learners. When we are thinking about fluency in math, we are thinking about three different elements. So if a learner is fluent, they should be, number one, accurate. That means that they should be able to arrive at the correct answer. But that's not enough. Number two, they should also be efficient. We don't want them to take a long time to arrive at the correct answer. 4 to 5 seconds is best for learners to be considered to be efficient. If they're coming up with the right answer or the correct answer, but it takes them 2 minutes to do so, they're not as efficient as we would want them to be. And last, learners should be flexible with their use of strategies and with their thinking. So this means that learners should learn a variety of different strategies to help them to be able to be flexible within their thinking. So that way, when they are faced with a specific equation to solve, they have multiple avenues and strategies that they can choose from to actually be able to solve the equation. So accuracy, efficiency, and flexibility, all three of these are actually needed and required for a learner to be fluent within math. So this particular standard is really nice in that it allows us to see the things that are required to be proficient within the standard, but it also tells us some things that should not be used and actually hinders learners from being able to meet the standard proficiently. So within this, the standard specifically mentions not using flashcards. And the reason why we do not want to use flashcards is because we are wanting learners to know how to use the strategies that were mentioned and how to be able to use mental math, how to be able to compose and decompose equations when looking at them. As a matter of fact, we are wanting to make sure that learners are not simply just memorizing the answer to an equation when they see it. They need to be able to dive deeper into it and to know why the answer is what it is. These particular strategies, the ones that we have already mentioned, such as counting on and making 10, these strategies replace actually using time tests, which we'll talk about in a minute, or using flashcards as well. So let's dive into time tests. Ultimately, time tests can raise stress levels for learners as they are trying to become proficient and trying to learn. So while timing a test is not wrong, and in some cases they will have to take time tests, we don't want it to just be how fast can you solve all of these equations, and that's all it is all the time. So we don't want to stress learners out while they're actually learning, and we want to make sure that they're not simply just memorizing an answer. They need to be able to reason why and really understand why the answer is what it is. So these are two things that we're going to want to definitely stay away from. Is the use of flashcards, and time tests in themselves, when they're used effectively and sparingly, are not bad, but we definitely do not want this to be the norm for a learner, such as every Friday we're taking a time test. That's not what we want it to be for learners. Okay, so we had an opportunity to kind of dive into this standard just a little bit. Keep in mind that this particular standard, I can't stress this enough, really has to deal with a learner being able to mentally add and subtract within 20. So while they may start out needing some paper and paper, or some pencil and paper and a few manipulatives, we want them to be able to move away from this and to be able to mentally have those strategies in place that encourage them and help them to be able to actually solve equations the correct way. And keep in mind that those mental strategies, again, we're counting on, making a 10, using the relationship between addition and subtraction, and creating easier problems. So these are the ones that we want to make sure that we give learners multiple experiences to actually be able to get proficient in. So when you're working with your learners, be sure to ask them questions about how did you come up with that strategy and what strategy did you use? So thank you so much for tuning in and learning more about the second grade math standard 2.OA.2. Feel free to visit us on any of our social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Also, feel free to visit us if you're looking for more strategies and resources at www.iededucationalcenter.com.